Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry, and on today's show, I'm going to be breaking down my list of Steelers cut candidates for the 2026 offseason. Today, it will be the players that I think are the most likely to be cut by the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. But before we get into the content today, kick us off down there in the comments section by letting me know which Steelers player will surprisingly not be on the team this season. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section and give me your pick. Now, we'll kick off today's show by letting you guys know exactly how much cap space the Steelers are projected to have according to Spotrac. And when you take into account the at least $22 million the Steelers are expected to add to their cap space because of the NFL cap growing by $22 million this upcoming season, the Steelers are currently slated to have just over $66.7 million in cap space before cuts. That is the 8th most in the National Football League as we stand here today. But you could always, get a little bit more. There's certainly going to be a lot of teams restructuring and cutting and doing all these different things to try and get them closer to $100 million in cap space, for example. So today we're going to be making some cuts to, give the Steelers some options to add some more cap space to their arsenal before free agency. Starting with Jonnu Smith, this one is pretty easy for me, and this is probably the person that's most likely to be cut, in my opinion. You save $7 million against the cap next year if you let him go. Now, last year, Jonnu Smith, for some reason, had the most snaps out of any tight end on the Steelers roster, beating out Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington. Now, to be fair, Washington was on his way to getting the most snaps on the team before he got injured late in the season. But when it was all said and done, Jonnu Smith ended up having the most snaps in Arthur Smith's offense last year at the tight end position, despite the fact that he had 0.8 yards per route run last year, which was the lowest in the National Football League among tight ends with at least 250 routes run. And that's not just for the 2025 season, guys. That's since 2019. The last 6 years, that is the lowest number for a tight end that has had at least 250 routes run in this league. That just shows you how bad Jonnu Smith was as a receiving threat last year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Jonnu, just didn't provide any value. Like you guys know, if you've been watching the channel over the course of this past season, I don't think Jonnu Smith is a good blocker. I don't think he's a particularly good route runner. I don't think he's got particularly good hands, and I don't think he's as good of a yak threat as he used to be. And he was just somebody that was out there just getting completely blanketed all the time, and it's pretty much just a non-option in the passing game. Yet despite that, Arthur Smith felt like it was a good idea to keep him in the offense as much as he did and prioritize him as much as he did in 2025. And then when you take into account the 2026 financials, if you keep him, it's over a $10 million cap hit to keep him around next year. The dead cap is just over $3.8 million, so you save $7 million against your cap next year if you let him go this year. This is a no-brainer decision for me. Add that $7 million to the total of the Steelers cap space here in 2026 as far as I'm concerned. Now, another guy that could be cut this year is Cory Trice Jr., 7th-round pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers a couple of years back. He just hasn't, unfortunately, been able to stay healthy. You only save just over $1 million if you cut him, but honestly, man, and unfortunately, Cory just hasn't been able to stay healthy in multiple seasons now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's had some sort of pretty major injury the last 3 years. He didn't even play a single down for the Pittsburgh Steelers this past year. He didn't play a single down in his rookie season either, and he only played a couple games in his second season before, once again, getting injured and not being able to get back onto the field. So, injuries that were an issue of his coming out of Purdue, it was a risk that, the Steelers knew they were taking on and they were willing to take on as a 7th-round pick. I still think it was a good choice by Omar to bring him in because, he's got physicality, he's got long arms, got, good athlete, all those different things. If he would have been able to stay healthy, I think that we'd be talking a little bit differently about Cory Trice Jr. right now. But honestly, I could see this call going either way. Cory still has 1 year left on his rookie contract. The Steelers could say, you know what, this is still a very physically talented individual with long arms and all these different things and a really good physical package. It's not like he's taking up that much of the cap. I mean, bring him back to camp next year, see what he can do. If he can't stay healthy in his 4th NFL season, you can just let him go in free agency for nothing. But if you want to let him go, you can save about $1 million in cap space if you let him go this offseason. So make the call for me down there in the comment section. Should the Steelers cut Cory Trice Jr.? Give me a yes or no down there in the comment section for today's pinned question. In just a second here, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today. While I tell you about our sponsor today, simply give me a yes or a no to answer today's pinned question. And with that, you guys can get our Steel City Drinking Team St. Patrick's Day themed t-shirts on our website right now. You guys can go chatsports.com/pitgreen to pick up this t-shirt today. I helped our design team here at Chat Sports design this t-shirt. I love this color green. I love the gold lettering there on the Steel City Drinking Team there, and then you got our Chat Sports logo on there as well. It's only $29.99, and you guys have been asking for merch opportunities for multiple years now. We're finally getting into the merch game here on Steelers Talk, and guys, my bosses tell me the more that we sell of these t-shirts, the more merch we're going to get. So I'd really appreciate it if you guys make a purchase today. All you have to do is go to our link, chatsports.com/pitgreen. That is down in the comments and description of today's show. You click that link, you make a purchase of just $29.99, and that's going to tell our bosses that we can push merch here on this show and that we can have more opportunities for the NFL draft when we sign new players, when we trade for new players, all that different stuff. So if you guys want more merch opportunities on this channel, take advantage of this opportunity right now by going to chatsports.com/pitgreen. Now we'll continue our list here of cut candidates for the Pittsburgh Steelers with Patrick Queen, and you can save $13.4 million against the cap, 13.3 depending on what source you trust there. But Queen is certainly somebody that hasn't lived up to the massive contract that he got from the Pittsburgh Steelers a couple of off seasons ago, coming off an all-pro season, playing in Mike Macdonald's Baltimore Ravens defense. And last year, he just wasn't a very good linebacker, plain and simply, if you believe the PFF grading. Now, PFF grading's not gospel or anything like that, but, it's not very good when you have one of the highest paid linebackers in football and they're performing at a bottom 10 level in overall Pro Football Focus grading among NFL starting linebackers, bottom 20 in run defense grade, bottom 5 in coverage grade, bottom 10 in missed tackle rate. The one thing he did do at a pretty high level, though, is he was a very good blitzer. That's something that, Patrick Queen has always been very good at. When he's allowed to play downhill, he's still a very good player, very, very athletic individual, can go sideline to sideline. He's always had that in his bag. But you combine these numbers and you combine the fact that he just wasn't very good with the Pittsburgh Steelers these last 2 years with these facts right here on the financial side of things, where, his cap hit is over $17 million for the Pittsburgh Steelers next year if they bring him back. And, the dead cap, is not that much. So you could save quite a bit, $13.3, $13.4 million here if you cut Patrick Queen. So I understand why a lot of people want to save that money. However, despite those facts, I think it's, the more I think about this, the more I'd like to keep Patrick Queen for another year and have him play out the final season of his current contract with the black and gold. I think he'd be a lot better in Patrick Graham's defense. I just do, man. Like, this Steelers defense under Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin was notorious for putting his inside linebackers in some really tough spots. I mean, Patrick Queen himself alluded to this last year, and, we've seen kind of the results. I mean, it seems like every single linebacker that has come through here over the last several years has really struggled, and then when they go somewhere else, they play a lot better. Robert Spillane is now one of the better starting linebackers in football. He was just a rotational linebacker here in Pittsburgh. Devin Bush was a first-round pick here, struggles, and then he goes to the Cleveland Browns, and poof, he's all of a sudden a really good linebacker again. He's going to get paid pretty well on the free agency market this year. So Pittsburgh's defense has been notoriously tough on linebackers and giving them tough assignments, and Patrick Queen was pretty transparent about that, specifically last year when he was getting some pretty heavy criticism. And it's not like Peyton Wilson and Malik Harrison, the guys that are also on this roster, are sure things either. Like, if you get rid of Patrick Queen, do you really have a high level of confidence in Peyton Wilson, who was benched for Malik Harrison last year, a guy that can't cover in pass defense? Like, I feel like this linebacker room gets worse if Patrick Queen is not here, and you're going to miss that athleticism that he brings to the table. And, another thing is, like, who are we replacing him with? Because that's a big question. Like, if you're going to say, let's get rid of Patrick Queen, who are we replacing him with? Because I don't have a ton of confidence in Peyton Wilson or Malik Harrison to be your number 1 and number 2 guys. You're going to have to find a number 3 guy in the rotation at the very least. And like Devin Lloyd, I think he's a really good linebacker, but you're going to have to pay more for him than to just keep Patrick Queen. Is he worth that much more than Patrick Queen? I don't know about that. Devin Bush, I don't think he wants to come back to Pittsburgh. Nakobe Dean is an undersized kind of sub-package linebacker. Leo Chanel, is okay, but I would rather have Patrick Queen than him. And then Alex Anzalone is getting up there in age. So personally, like, I don't see a lot of free agent solutions at this position. And now it's a very good linebacker class, which is, a good thing. So, like, if you wanted to draft a rookie to start right away and to be your number one linebacker, that's fine. But I look at that position, linebacker, it's very difficult to pick up in the NFL on day one. You're asking a lot out of a rookie linebacker to be essentially your number one linebacker on day one, if that's the route you want to go down. So what I would do is I wouldn't extend Patrick Queen or anything like that, but I'd keep him on his current contract. I'd keep him for another year. I'd see what I can get out of Peyton Wilson and Malik Harrison in this new defense led by new defensive coordinator Patrick Graham, and then I would draft a developmental linebacker in the middle rounds. There's a lot of really good traitsy linebacker guys that you can get in the middle rounds of this year's NFL draft that can be Patrick Queen's understudy, and then maybe in 2027 you can let Patrick Queen go, and then you can have that rookie that you draft this year be ready to step up into that starting role once we get to 2027. But then the final cut candidate I want to talk about today is Mason Rudolph, the backup quarterback. You can save $3 million against the cap by letting him go. And let's face it, guys, Rudy isn't a long-term quarterback possibility for this team. I think he's an okay backup, and you can win football games in this league with Mason Rudolph as your starting quarterback, especially if the surrounding cast is pretty good. But the truth is, if whoever the starting quarterback for the Steelers is next year goes down, Rudolph is not good enough to win a Super Bowl. He just isn't, all right? He's no Nick Foles. I think he's an okay backup, but, if the starter goes down and he's out for the season's over anyway, right? So I think Mason Rudolph is fine, but I think now that you're kind of transitioning under Mike McCarthy here to trying to find the next franchise quarterback, the long-term solution at quarterback here, I think the best plan to go forward with is Aaron Rodgers, because he can be your best short-term plan. I think he gives this team the best chance to win a Super Bowl next season, but then he also gives the Steelers the possibility of having two long-term possibilities work behind him as his backup quarterbacks. Now, in terms of who those backup quarterbacks could be, I think Will Howard is clearly one of the guys that could be a backup quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers next year. Reportedly, Mike McCarthy is very high on Will Howard, and we've discussed Will Howard at length on this channel. He's got some starter traits. I think his upside looks something at the very, very top like Dak Prescott. He's got a long way to go before he can get there, but under a guy like Mike McCarthy, who's been known for developing quarterback talent, I do think Will Howard's upside is something like that, a borderline top 10 quarterback, if he, hits every stride along the way here. But outside of Will Howard, there's a lot of other possibilities that the Pittsburgh Steelers can look at in terms of a potential long-term option that can compete with Will Howard to be the next franchise quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And we've seen a lot of kind of quote-unquote rehab quarterbacks over the last several years. Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Sam Darnold, who just won a Super Bowl, where, they're a very talented guy. They go to a team in a bad situation. They don't look as good. And then they go to a team with a good quarterback developer, and then poof, they're back to being a starting caliber quarterback. If you want to go that route for your backup quarterback this year, Anthony Richardson is interesting. Zach Wilson, former number 2 overall pick, is interesting with a lot of arm talent. Same thing goes for Will Levis, really quick release, just like Aaron Rodgers. Spencer Rattler showed some decent things in New Orleans this past year, even though Tyler Shuck looked better. And Trey Lance is another guy to keep your eye on as well, who's still only like 25 years old. He's going to be like 26 next year. He's younger than Malik Willis. But some other younger options that you could look at that I've seen thrown around out there. Joe Milton is an interesting one that you could think about if the Cowboys are willing to let him go. Jalen Milroe, it doesn't seem like the Seattle Seahawks are going to be moving off of Sam Darnold anytime soon, so Milroe could be got in a trade if you like him. Tanner McKee has looked pretty decent as the backup quarterback for Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. Davis Mills is a name that I've heard thrown around out there. Same thing goes for Jarrett Stidham. But, I would say, guys, keep your eye on Trey Lance. He was with Mike McCarthy in Dallas. He actually played a little bit towards the end of that season, looked okay, and then he looked actually really good in the preseason this year for the Chargers. I know it's just preseason, but Trey Lance, man, he's got obviously some good mobility. He's got some great arm strength. This guy was taken number 3 overall just a few years back, and he's still super, super young. If McCarthy feels like the steps that Lance took with him there in Dallas were good enough to maybe take another stab at him, I could see him signing for a team-friendly deal to be this team's backup quarterback this year. And if he develops nicely under Aaron Rodgers, who knows? He's got the physical talent to be a potential franchise option for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But also, I think Will Levis and Anthony Richardson are also interesting possibilities to me because they're both massively physically talented. And they were, Anthony Richardson was just not ready to play in the National Football League his first few years in the league, plain and simple. And neither was Will Levis. And also, Levis was in a terrible situation. You give either one of those guys a year to sit behind one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time and Aaron Rodgers, and then an awesome QB developer like Mike McCarthy. I mean, those guys have the physical talent to be the next Sam Darnold, the next Baker Mayfield. This is, the highly touted, highly talented quarterbacks that fail in their first spot, but they go somewhere else and then they figure it out. I'm just saying it's an interesting possibility. Then another thing that you could do is you could grab a developmental quarterback prospect in the draft, someone like a Garrett Nussmeier on day 2, Sawyer Robertson, Drew Aller, Cole Payton, or Cade Klubnik on day 3, most likely. Maybe Drew Aller goes day 2, but I could certainly see the Steelers, once again going for a day 3 quarterback prospect this year to add to the mix of guys that could be in the mix to potentially be this team's long-term answer at the quarterback position. So let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. What does your ideal Steelers quarterback room look like next season? Let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section, but something tells me we're going to see something along the lines of Aaron Rodgers at QB1, Trey Lance at number 2, and then Will Howard at number 3. That's probably my early prediction right now, but let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. Now, before I go, I do want to address a player that many seem to think is going to be getting cut this offseason, but I really doubt actually will get cut by the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that player is Jalen Ramsey, okay? And I think the confusion here is that over the cap has Jalen Ramsey listed as a player that the Steelers can cut this offseason, save $19.5 million against the cap with $0 in dead cap, okay? And, if that were the case, I could see why people, would think that Jalen Ramsey could be a cut candidate this year. But the reality of the situation is the Pittsburgh Steelers restructured Jalen Ramsey's contract, and over the cap has not accounted for that. Well, Spotrac has. So if you look at the Spotrac, profile for Jalen Ramsey, you'll see these financial details pop up. Or next year, his cap hit is just over $17.2 million. But if you release him, his dead cap number, because of the restructure, is $14.5 million in dead cap. You only save about $2.6 million against the cap if you straight up cut Jalen Ramsey next offseason. You don't save 19.5 like some people seem to think because of over the cap's mistake there, and they need to upgrade. They need to update their profile for him. But it's just not worth cutting Jalen Ramsey for just $2.6 million in savings, guys. It just isn't. I think Ramsey's still a really good player. I think in particular he's a really good nickel player. I think part of the problem last year is that the Steelers asked Ramsey to be a one-on-one man corner early in the season against true number 1 receivers like Jamar Chase, and that's not the type of player that he is. He's the type of player that's really good in that man match or zone match system as a nickel star player that can use his instincts and his intelligence and his incredible tackling ability to really make an impact on the football game. And we saw, when the Steelers wanted to play more quarters and play more zone match stuff, he was excellent. Where he struggled was really in the man-to-man stuff. And I still think, with his tackling ability, with his size, with his blitzing ability, he can still make instinctual plays on the football. If you move him back to nickel instead of playing him at safety, where frankly he just wasn't a natural at that position last year, you move him back to nickel, I think he can be a very impactful player in Patrick Graham's defense, which does like to dabble in some of those 3 safety packages, big nickel stuff, and I think Ramsey fits that mold to a T, so I think he will be back with the Pittsburgh Steelers next year. But if they want to move on from him, it makes more sense to try and trade him than to cut him because of the way his contract is structured. Some of that money, the dead cap money that the Steelers would be taking on if they cut him, would be transferring to the new team. It's a bunch of minutia, but essentially if the Steelers want to actually save some money by trading Jalen Ramsey, they have to trade him this offseason instead of cutting him. I break this all down in our surprise trade candidates video where I do mention Jalen Ramsey in that video, guys. So if you want to check that out for more information in terms of the players that the Steelers could be trading this offseason, I'm going to put the chip to that one in the top right and put the link down there in the comments and description of today's show. But that's going to be it for today's cut candidates video for the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you made it to the end of today's show, I want to give you you guys some love down there in the comments section. So identify yourself as a real one by typing real one in all caps down there in the comments section to finish up today's show. And that'll be it for today's edition of Steelers Talk by Chat Sports. Thank you guys so much for joining me here today. I'll catch you guys next time. And until then, here we go, Steelers.